having a blind child. When I was 4, she told me that perhaps if I wasn't blind, she could have loved me. My father was a dear, but he didn't have much of a say in the house. My mother thought that blind people had to be dependent all the time. I made up my mind then that if I ever got out of my mother's house for good, I was going to have myself a wonderful time. And by gosh, I have. I've had a ball.
I thought the world came to an end when I lost my sight. I couldn't drive and had to give up my job. My sister once asked me, if you had all the money in the world, what would be the first thing you'd do? Well, I told her I'd buy a car and hire a chauffeur. I'd probably still say that. But now I have a volunteer who drives me places. She takes me shopping every 2 weeks. She's an angel. I could ask my son to help, but the volunteer makes me feel more independent. I couldn't stand it if I had to call my children to ask them to do this, I need that. I don't think I could live that way.
6 weeks after the accident, I'm still in Mass General trying to figure out how I'm gonna live. And the chief ophthalmologist comes into my room. He was very gentle, and he sort of took my hand and said, Bill, I'm afraid we've exhausted our meager talents. My first thought was, Bill Rader sitting on the sidewalk in front of Filene's basement with a tin cup. And then I thought, I can do better than that. So I thought how much I loved Alaska and how I was interested in government. And I decided I don't see any reason why I couldn't go back to Alaska and become a United States Senator. So I got out of bed and got the ski pole that the doctor had brought in for me. He cleverly didn't bring me a blind man's cane. And I went out in the corridor and I visited the other patients and said hello to all the nurses.
It's funny. After going blind, I became much more of a daredevil. It might have something to do with the fact that I can't see what I'm doing. Years ago, I decided I wanted to go skydiving for my 50th birthday. But everybody said, God, I hope she forgets about this. But I didn't forget. The most wonderful thing was that I was tethered to a sighted jumper, and as we were floating, floating, floating down, he would describe the scene to me. The trees along the riverbank, the grassy banks, the hills. Oh, it was so beautiful.
One night after I'd started grad school at BU, I was out on the prowl with 2 friends. But as we would say in those days, no action. But they wanted to go to a party out in Arlington, so I went along. It was pretty lively with a lot of people, and that was where I met Daphne. I was in the kitchen with my flask when this very nice young lady came and started popping hors d'oeuvres in my mouth. We got to chatting. Well, we got married 7 months after we met. It was the best thing that ever happened to me.
The best decision I made was to join a correspondence club when I was 36. A man wrote to me to see if I would like to correspond by tape. A year later, we started dating, and 2 years later, we got married. He's a disabled veteran, sighted, but he has a nervous disability. He drove trucks at night in France and Belgium, and it was so dark and so scary that it changed him, I guess. He's a good man and a good husband, and we're happy. We never had children, but sometimes my volunteer Sylvia brings over her kids. One time she brought Adam, the youngest one, when he was 10 weeks old. I started talking to him, and that baby took my finger, and he cooed and carried on. Oh, he was adorable. So, of course, I picked him right up, and she read my mail to me while I held him. New life. I've never held a baby that young before.
When I met my husband, I had long red hair down to here, and he used to love to braid it for me. We got married as soon as I graduated from college. We adopted 2 teenagers, and I worked part-time. But then my kidney failed again, and my husband decided that he didn't want to deal with it anymore. So after 33 years, he left. It was devastating. I was so dependent on him. When he left, he said, "What I suggest is that you move into assisted living and let somebody take care of you, and we'll sell the house." And I remember saying, "I don't think so." I guess my inner grit came out, and I just pulled myself together. A big part of that was getting a MAB volunteer. Patricia is a lifesaver. You know, when you ask a friend or a family member to help, you're putting them on the spot, and it makes you feel degraded. You feel beholden. But Patricia comes because Patricia wants to help. She does the kind of things my husband would have done. We put up the Christmas decorations together each year, and she helps me buy presents for my grandkids. She's always there for me.
I've had volunteers because that's my way of asserting my independence. The one thing you don't want is for your wife to say, "Why are you buying that?" Because it's my business, that's why. We all have our secrets, and we all need our privacy.
Up until the early 90s, my wife Daphne paid all the bills. But that became a trial, and it wasn't helpful to our relationship. So I got a volunteer from MAB that took over the checkbook and started paying the bills myself.
My goal has always been to be self-sufficient. So when I finished high school, I got a job in a cafeteria run by the Agency for the Blind in Montpelier. I was to set up the counters, make the coffee, do the dishes, that kind of thing. Well, one Sunday, the cashier didn't come to work. The girls were frantic. "Can you do cash?" I said, "I don't know the prices, but I'll try." People were surprised that I could do it, but I never had any problem. I would listen to what they were ordering and have it all lined up by the time they got to me. I took cash until I left to get married 11 years later.
I was working